The streets of Glasgow had always carried whispers of crime, but when the Black Thistle began to rise, those whispers turned into shouts of fear. At the heart of this new reign stood Euan McCrae, a man whose name became synonymous with ruthlessness. He had not grown up with privilege, nor did he inherit power from anyone before him. His strength came from survival, his cunning sharpened by years of street life, where only the boldest survived. Euan understood one thing more than anyone else. Fear was the most valuable currency. If people feared you, they obeyed you. And so he built his gang not just with weapons and money, but with a reputation that cut deeper than any knife. In the early days, the Black Thistle was little more than a small band of restless young men who loitered in alleyways, hustling cigarettes and cheap drugs to make ends meet. But Euan had a vision far larger than the petty games of his rivals. He recruited men who were not just violent, but also fiercely loyal. Callum Boyd, his right hand, was the embodiment of brute force. Towering, broad-shouldered and quick to explode into violence, Callum became the hammer Euan used to crush anyone who dared resist them. Where Euan was calculating, Callum was savage, a weapon unleashed at just the right moments. Then there was Rory Sutherland, a quieter presence, but no less dangerous. Rory had an unnerving ability to think 2 steps ahead of everyone else. While Euan commanded with intimidation, Rory ensured their plans were precise, covering the cracks others would miss. Together they began to carve a path through Glasgow's criminal underworld. Street corners that once belonged to local thugs now bore the shadow of the Black Thistle. Small businesses that resisted paying protection money found bricks through their windows and threats scrawled on their doors. The gang's Black Thistle emblem, crudely painted across walls and shop shutters, became a symbol of both dominance and warning. Within a few years they controlled entire neighborhoods. Those who joined them did so out of fear or desperation, and those who resisted either disappeared or learned to stay silent. Euan's rise was not without blood. His methods were brutal, and the streets were littered with reminders of his wrath. Rival gangs underestimated him at first, mocking the young leader with his ragtag band of loyalists. But as bodies began to pile up and rivals vanished, the laughter stopped. Euan had no hesitation in turning the city's narrow alleys into execution grounds. His message was clear: cross the Black Thistle, and you would not live to regret it. The press began to take notice of the violence, but few understood the depth of what was happening. Behind closed doors, Euan had established a network that reached far beyond street fights. The Black Thistle was smuggling drugs through hidden routes, creating alliances with smaller gangs, and even buying silence from corrupted officers who preferred money over justice. It was no longer about survival, it was about empire. Euan had transformed from a street hustler into the undisputed king of Glasgow's criminal landscape. Yet with power came paranoia. Euan's mind, once focused and sharp, grew increasingly clouded by suspicion. He trusted only Callum and Rory, and even then, cracks began to form. Callum's loyalty was unquestionable, but his reckless violence often drew too much attention, forcing Euan to clean up messes he did not want. Rory, calm and calculating, held his own ambitions, ones he never voiced but carried quietly in his eyes. Euan, blinded by his own need for dominance, ignored the silent warning signs. The Black Thistle had become an unstoppable force in the eyes of the city. Fear spread faster than the drugs they sold, and Euan believed he was untouchable. But in the world of crime, power is never permanent. The same fear that built his empire would one day sow the seeds of betrayal. What began as a brotherhood forged in ambition was already beginning to twist into something far more dangerous. Something that even Euan McRae could not control. You said expand a chapter 2 600 words long, don't add any headings. ChatGPT said. The Black Thistle's grip on Glasgow brought them more power than any street gang had ever dared to imagine. But with that power came enemies from every direction. To outsiders, Euan McCrae and his men looked unstoppable, but rival groups across Scotland were growing restless. In Edinburgh, the Iron Cross gang had once dominated the east side, and in Dundee a smaller but vicious group, known as the Highland Vultures, was desperate to carve their name into the underworld. To them the Black Thistle's rapid expansion was a direct threat, and threats demanded answers. The city streets were becoming battlefields, each corner a contested prize, and every night brought rumors of ambushes and bloody warnings. The clash that would cement the Black Thistle's reputation as Scotland's most feared gang happened on a freezing winter evening. Snow clung to the pavements, and the air cut like glass, but none of it could mask the tension that gripped Buchanan Street. Callum Boyd led a group of hardened men into what was supposed to be a quick message to their rivals, an ambush designed to remind outsiders who controlled the city. But rival scouts had been watching closely, and what began as intimidation turned into open warfare. The first gunshots echoed like thunder through the narrow street, sending civilians scattering in terror. Shouts mixed with the sound of breaking glass as fists, knives and bullets tore into the night. The fight was quick but devastating. 4 men from the Iron Cross gang lay dead by the time the smoke cleared, their bodies sprawled across the icy pavement. The Black Thistle had lost 2 men of their own, though their bodies were never recovered. Rumors spread that they had been dragged away by rival fighters, but no one ever confirmed what happened to them. The violence left the city in shock. Headlines the next morning declared Scotland's street war, painting Glasgow as a city under siege. For ordinary citizens, the fear was suffocating. People avoided going out after dark, shops shut early, and the police presence grew heavier, though their efforts barely scratched the surface of what was unfolding. For Euan McCrae, the bloodshed was both a victory and a curse. The Black Thistle had proven their dominance, but the attention from the press and police was exactly what he wanted to avoid. Yet it wasn't just the authorities he had to worry about. Inside his own circle, seeds of dissent were beginning to take root. Rory Sutherland, ever quiet and calculating, had watched the events of Buchanan Street unfold with a sharp eye. To him, the battle was not a show of strength, but a reckless gamble. Euan's hunger for power was turning the gang into a target too large to hide. Rory had begun to think differently. Where Euan thrived on chaos, Rory saw the need for control, and control could only come through a change in leadership. Callum Boyd, meanwhile, wore the clash like a badge of honor. To him, every fight was proof of his loyalty and his strength. He boasted about the blood spilled on Buchanan Street, proud to serve as the enforcer of the Black Thistle. His devotion to Euan was unshakable, but his loud victories only masked the quiet betrayal growing in Rory's mind. While Callum saw the gang as a family, Rory saw it as a game of survival, and he had no intention of being crushed beneath Euan's ambition. The police scrambled to piece together what had happened that night, but fear silenced witnesses. No one dared to speak against the Black Thistle. The investigation stalled, leaving the gang free to tighten their hold. But beneath the surface of their apparent victory, the cracks were widening. The missing men from the Buchanan fight haunted Euan, raising questions about loyalty and hidden motive. He trusted Rory to help rebuild the gang's strength, unaware that Rory was already plotting his fall. The war with rivals had solidified the Black Thistle's reputation, but it had also opened the door to betrayal from within, a betrayal that would prove more dangerous than any rival gang on the streets of Scotland. Want me to expand Chapter 3 with 600 words in the same detailed, suspenseful style? You said expand Chapter 3 600 words long, don't add any headings. ChatGPT said Rory Sutherland had always been patient, a man who knew that real power was not taken with noise, but stolen in silence. While Euan McRae basked in the fear his name carried and Callum Boyd thrived on violence, Rory moved quietly through the shadows of the gang. He studied every weakness, every mistake, every reckless decision that Euan made. The Buchanan Street massacre had been the turning point. To Rory, it was no longer a question of whether Euan's recklessness would destroy the Black Thistle, but when, and Rory had no intention of going down with him. Euan trusted Rory more than anyone else. He valued Rory's calm logic and ability to see beyond immediate threat. That trust became Rory's most dangerous weapon. He began to plant doubts in the minds of younger recruits, men who had joined the gang not out of loyalty to Euan, but out of desperation. Rory whispered that Euan was leading them into ruin, that his obsession with violence would only bring more police attention, more dead men, more empty promises of power. He painted himself as the steady hand, the one who could secure their survival. Slowly those whispers became belief. The cracks inside the gang widened, invisible to Euan, who was too focused on stamping out rivals to notice betrayal blooming at his side. The moment to strike came during a planned raid on a rival stash house in Dundee. It was supposed to be a decisive move, one that would cripple the Highland Vultures and expand the Black Thistle's territory even further. Euan led the operation himself, flanked by Callum and a group of trusted fighters. But what Euan didn't know was that Rory had already spoken to the police. With a few carefully placed words and just enough detail, Rory ensured that the raid would become a trap. When the night of the raid came, everything unraveled in seconds. As the Black Thistle forced their way into the warehouse, floodlights blazed to life and armed officers poured in from every direction. Gunshots cracked, shouts echoed, and chaos consumed the scene. Several of Euan's men were arrested on the spot, dragged away in handcuffs. Others fled into the darkness, disappearing into the city streets. Euan himself barely escaped, sprinting through a back exit with Callum covering his retreat. The once flawless leader had been humiliated, his gang shattered, his reputation bleeding out on the cold floor of that warehouse. For Euan, the betrayal was invisible. He believed the leak had come from outside, perhaps from a rival gang or a corrupt officer who had been bought for a higher price. He never suspected Rory, the man who had stood quietly at his side through every battle. In the days that followed, Euan became paranoid, searching for traitors where there were none, while Rory tightened his grip on the gang from within. Then, without warning, Euan disappeared. Some said he was ambushed while traveling alone through a desolate stretch of road outside Glasgow. Others whispered he had been betrayed by his own and executed in a place where no one would ever find his body. What was known for certain was that he never returned. No one claimed responsibility, no body was recovered, and no proof was ever uncovered. For those inside the gang, the message was clear: Euan McRae was gone, and Rory Sutherland stood in his place. Rory stepped forward with calm authority, declaring himself the leader. He promised order, strategy, and stability, a sharp contrast to Euan's blood-soaked rule. To outsiders, it seemed the Black Thistle had shed its recklessness and found a leader who valued control. But beneath Rory's polished surface lay a far colder ambition. He had not betrayed Euan to save the gang, he had betrayed him to own it. And while Callum Boyd remained, fierce and loyal to the memory of Euan, his silence masked a dangerous rage that simmered deep inside. The rise of Rory was complete, but the shadow of betrayal was far from finished. Want me to expand Chapter 4 with 600 words as the powerful conclusion to the story? You said expand Chapter 4 600 words. Long. Don't add any headings. ChatGPT said. Rory Sutherland's rise to power was swift and carefully executed. With Euan McCrae gone, he rebuilt the Black Thistle into a machine that operated with precision rather than chaos. He reorganized their drug routes, strengthened ties with smaller gangs, and kept his men in line through fear mixed with promises of stability. To many, Rory seemed like the leader the gang had always needed: cold, strategic, and untouchable. For a time his empire flourished, stretching beyond Glasgow and creeping into Edinburgh's underground. On the surface, it looked as though the Black Thistle had reached its peak. But every empire carries the weight of its foundation, and this one had been built on betrayal. Callum Boyd, once the hammer of Euan's rule, never forgot the night his leader vanished. His loyalty to Euan had been absolute, and his silence since Rory's takeover was not born of obedience, but of calculation. Callum understood that Rory was behind Euan's disappearance, even if he had no proof. The bond of brotherhood that had once defined the Black Thistle had been shattered, and Callum carried the fracture like a wound that never healed. Rory viewed Callum as both an asset and a threat. The man's loyalty to the gang was unquestionable, and his reputation as a violent enforcer kept rivals at bay. But Rory could see the fire of suspicion in his eyes. He knew Callum was not blind, that his silence was not submission, but something far more dangerous. The balance between them became a game of shadows, with Rory tightening his control, while Callum plotted his own form of justice. As Rory's power expanded, the police grew bolder. Raids struck across Glasgow, safe houses were dismantled, and shipments were intercepted. Yet no matter how many blows were dealt, the Black Thistle adapted and survived. To the authorities it seemed as though they were chasing ghosts. But behind the sudden precision of these raids was Callum Boyd, moving quietly, feeding information to those who hunted the gang. It was his revenge, a way to dismantle Rory's empire piece by piece, until nothing remained. The collapse began slowly. A drug house in Edinburgh was raided, its stash worth millions seized. Then a weapons cache hidden in a Glasgow warehouse was uncovered and destroyed. One by one, Rory's strongest operations crumbled, leaving him scrambling to maintain order among his men. He lashed out, suspecting leaks from within, punishing loyal members who had nothing to do with the betrayals. His paranoia grew, and the calm strategic image he had built began to fracture.
The very stability he promised the Black Thistle was unraveling in his hands. The final blow came with undeniable proof. Callum, who had collected fragments of evidence and whispers of Rory's role in Euan's disappearance, delivered them directly to the police. Documents, accounts and testimony from frightened men who had once followed Rory were enough to paint the picture of betrayal and murder. Armed with this evidence, the police launched a coordinated strike on one of Rory's strongholds outside Aberdeen. The raid was brutal and swift. Armed officers stormed the building in the dead of night, catching Rory and his closest allies off guard. Gunfire erupted, but the gang was overwhelmed. Rory was dragged out in handcuffs, his empire collapsing around him in flames and shattered glass. For the first time, the man who had once seemed untouchable was powerless, his ambitions stripped away in a single night. With Rory imprisoned and facing charges that would lock him away for decades, the Black Thistle dissolved. Some of its members scattered into obscurity, while others tried to rebuild fragments of the empire but failed without a strong leader. Callum Boyd, the silent architect of Rory's downfall, disappeared into the shadows, leaving behind only rumors of his fate. Some said he fled Scotland, others believed he stayed hidden in the city, a ghost watching the ruins of the gang he once served. The story of the Black Thistle became more than a tale of crime. It became a warning. In Scotland's underworld, power could rise quickly, but fall even faster, and betrayal was often more deadly than bullets. Euan McCrae had built his empire on fear. Rory Sutherland had stolen it through treachery, and Callum Boyd had destroyed it through vengeance. In the end, the gang that once ruled the streets of Glasgow was nothing more than a scar on the city's history, a reminder of how greed, ambition, and betrayal could bring even the deadliest empire to its knees.